Fairhaven is a special place. Our neighborhoods are nestled between the shores of Herring Bay and a series of cliffs formed by ancient seas. Streams from the hillsides join the bay to create a beautiful wetland known as the lake, the pond, or the cove. Today, we savor the cove's scenic beauty and the abundance of birds, fish, and wildlife. But for nearly 50 years, it attracted more than birds and crabs. This story tells of the days when the Cove was the social hub of Fairhaven, and it was a hopping place. When families moved here in the 1920s, Fairhaven Road crossed the creek in the middle of grassy fields. There was a several hundred-foot buffer between the Cove and the bay, and a long sandy beach along the outer edge. The beach stretched from the southern end of the flats to a wetland in the middle of what is now Owings Cliffs. The beach was used by folks from Fairhaven and by families from nearby areas. During the 1920s, there was a small bathhouse at the north end of the beach where people could change into their woolen swimsuits. In 1930, a group came together to purchase land in Fairhaven so they could have access to the beach and the bay. They formed a corporation for their joint venture, which they called the Cove Club. The club bought some of the land between the Cove and the road. They built a square building with a screen porch all around. The central meeting room had a fireplace. It stood on high pilings with dressing rooms and privies at ground level. The club started with about 20 members, nearly half of whom were women. They came from nearby areas as well as D.C. and the Maryland suburbs. The membership roster soon grew to more than 50 people, some of whom were descended from families that had been in southern Maryland since before the Civil War. Although it was a private club, the members agreed to allow some Fairhaven residents to use their building from time to time. One group given access to the Cove Club was the Fairhaven Sunday School, which held services for adults and children there for 29 years. The Sunday School was established in 1936 by William and Ruth Dayton, who owned a house on Claggett Avenue in the Flats. The Sunday School Orchestra was conducted by Ted Lewis, a resident of Fairhaven Cliffs. Children were dressed in their Sunday best as they sang well-loved hymns of the day, including one written about the Fairhaven Cove.
Come, 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 come to the Cove in Fairhaven, the loveliest spot on the bay. No place is so dear to my Redeemer as God's Fairhaven Cove on the bay.
Their singing could be heard by folks lounging on the beach across the street from the Cove Club. The wide swath of sand and shade was a popular place for swimming, sunbathing, and for mooring residents' wooden boats and sailing skiffs. Recreational sailing was a relatively new sport in Herring Bay in the late 1930s, but Fairhaven teenagers took it up with a passion. They established the Fairhaven Sailing Club and raced a new class of boat known as the Chesapeake 20, which was designed by West River boat builder Dick Hartshee. They won the regatta for the Chesapeake 20s in the summer of 1941 and were among the founding members of the West River Sailing Club. They also hosted races in Herring Bay, some of which became legendary in their own right. The regattas ended with an awards ceremony, usually held on the lawn at the southern end of Claggett Avenue, which was called Ray's Point. Kids and their parents flocked to the party to hear local luminaries announce the winners. The real winners were the kids, of course, who had spent the summer swimming in the bay and playing or fishing in the creek. After a day in the sun, kids would pick up empty soda bottles and take them to Paget's store to exchange for some penny candy or a 5-cent soda. Paget's store was near the Cove Club, at the corner of Fairhaven and Revel Roads. It was originally owned by Captain James Revel, who was an oysterman in Herring Bay before he and his wife Alice opened the store in the 1920s. They also ran the Fairhaven Post Office, which was established in 1876. during the heyday of Fairhaven's steamboat era. In 1946, the Revels sold the store to Frank and Barbara Paget, who were their neighbors in Owings Cliffs. Paget's was a mom-and-pop store in the truest sense. They had a Texaco gas pump on the corner that registered a sale of 2 cents the minute you turned it on. The store had everything you needed during the summer in Fairhaven: food, suntan lotion, bug spray, and mouse traps. Everyone stopped by to get their mail and the day's newspaper. Unless she was sorting the mail, Mrs. Paget always made time to hug and kiss every child who came in the store, most of whom were barefoot. Telephone calls came through the store too. Only a handful of people had phones in their houses back then, so the payphone was a lifeline to the outside world. If someone needed to contact a person in Fairhaven, they would call the store and leave a message. The Paget's daughter, Mary, who took over the store from her parents, nicknamed the store the Squash Center because it was the gathering point for all the neighborhood gossip. The big news in 1954 was Hurricane Hazel, which was a Category 4 hurricane when it made landfall in Myrtle Beach that October. Its westward path pushed water up the bay, causing a huge tidal surge that was amplified by the high tides of the lunar cycle. Hurricane Hazel wiped out most of the beach in front of the Cove Club. With only a small tuft of land remaining, fewer residents and club members spent time there. But the Cove was still abuzz with activity on Sunday mornings in the 1950s, as scores of baby boomers ambled along the beach on their way to Sunday school with Mr. Lewis, who accompanied their enthusiastic singing on a portable organ. Winters were less kind to the Cove Club. Given its location, the building was always vulnerable to vandalism, but the problems got worse in the early 1960s. In 1964, members returned in the spring to find 39 broken window panes and most of their furniture damaged or stolen. The next summer, the Fairhaven Sunday School stopped holding services there because of the chronic problems. 1966 marked a new beginning for the Cove Club. A group of 5 families from across Fairhaven offered to lease and maintain the building for 10 years, a deal the members readily accepted. The inaugural community-wide cocktail party was held on July 8, 1967, with more to follow. Kids and adults came by during the day for art classes, bake sales, and other activities. The building also was a hangout for the baby boomers, who were now teenagers. Boys worked out with weights, flirted with girls, and drank beer. Lots of beer. In August 1970, everyone pitched in to spruce up the Cove Club for Barbara Beck and Steve Smith's wedding reception. Although some of the teenagers helped with the upkeep of the building, neither they nor the grown-ups could stop the vandalism that plagued the Cove Club. In 1975, the families who were leasing the building notified the club that they were terminating their agreement 1 year early. After vandals set fires inside the building in 1975 and 1977, the members of the Cove Club had no choice but to tear the building down. The community had lost Paget's store a few years earlier. In 1968, the Postal Service closed the Fairhaven Post Office and changed our mailing address to Dunkirk in Calvert County. Given their small size and mostly summertime clientele, it was hard for the store to stay in business. It closed in 1969, after Mary passed away. In 1972-73, the store fell victim to arson and was later torn down. Those of us who came here after 1978 never saw the store, the Cove Club, or the wide beach in front of the Cove. Instead, we see a narrow ribbon of land between the Cove and the bay, a buffer that's at risk from rising tides, runoff, and the inevitable hurricane. But when we walk along the Cove today, we enjoy the sights and sounds that have always drawn people here, of folks catching crabs in the creek, of birds and other critters lurking in the grasses, and of a beautiful wetland framed by forested hills. And we have inherited the spirit of community that took root at the Cove many decades ago, a camaraderie that makes Fairhaven a friendly, vibrant place for all who live between the hills and shores of Herring Bay.
Come, 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 come to the Cove in Fairhaven, the loveliest spot on the bay. No place is so dear to my Redeemer as God's Fairhaven Cove on the bay.